Okay, hi. Monday uh, afternoon here on the East Coast. Hope you all had a good Thanksgiving, and I thought I'd do the weekly video to summarize week 13, get us into week 14, and just a little peek into 15. Okay. Um, yeah, the background looks a little different today. I'm in my basement office. It's actually uh, a mess. It's because it's where I run my social enterprise out of, which I guess I'll talk just a little bit about at the end of the lecture. Okay, the lecture. Oh my goodness. At the end of just a little video here. So, last week we talked about financial leadership. We had the nice readings in the book by Bell. And then and that was all pretty straightforward. So we won't talk much about that. Um, Discussion Forum 1, was pretty straightforward. The second discussion forum, though, had to do with, Part P of the Terry Ann Lunt Greater Boston Rehabilitation Services case study. And I thought we had some nice discussions there. I really like that case study because um, well, the first thing Terry Ann does is really look at the finances and address those issues right away. Remember, no money, no mission. And when you walk into a new situation, you always really want to know what's happening with the finances right away. Um, I could tell a little story there, but I think I'll save it for another day. The second thing that you guys pointed out, and I really hadn't thought about it in this context, but you pointed out that um, Terry Ann really sort of looked and took care of the three uh, sides of the iron triangle. Um, yes, she took a look at the money, made sure the money was right, and worked on that. She also looked at the administrative capacities, got rid of the fiscal department, hired new people, and she also looked at the mission slash program side of the triangle, redefining mission and consolidating the programming that they would do that would be in line with the mission, that could be adequately supported by and supported and funded by both the finances and a great quality professional administrative staff. So I thought our discussions here were really interesting. And as I say, that notion of applying the triangle to the case study is something I hadn't really thought of before. So kudos. That was really good. Um, this week, we spent a little bit of time sort of in part looping back to the very beginning of the course again and thinking about diversification of nonprofit funding. And this is sort of like a truism of the uh, sector, right? Everybody wants to diversify their funding, so if some of the funding goes down, then other funding can fill the gap. Um, And I guess like with investment strategies, you want to diversify as well for the same reason. If you don't put all your eggs in one basket, then when you drop one of the baskets and the egg breaks, you still have other baskets and eggs, right? Okay, very sophisticated there. Um, okay, but I guess I want to make just a couple of points. Let's see. The default for nonprofits when you talk about diversification of funding uh, typically or traditionally has been, well, we'll do some fundraising, we'll find some more donors, we'll write a grant, we'll get a foundation to fund us. Okay, but if you go back to our first lesson, you remember that only 15% of nonprofits, the sector's funding actually comes from philanthropic sources, donations from either individuals or from foundations. And the second point there is simply that the amount of money that individuals give, uh, since they've been sort of tracking the statistic in the late 50s, early 60s, is a constant of personal income. Okay, basically, people in an aggregate give 2% of their personal income to charities. So when you, as a fundraiser, go out and try to raise money from individuals, from donors, you're all competing for the same pie, right? The pie doesn't get bigger or smaller because of your fundraiser's efforts. It really gets bigger or smaller depending upon how the economy is doing. So, like when the economy crashed in 2008, donations went down tremendously. And now that the economy's kind of back, yeah, donations are back and actually have exceeded the 2008 level. So the point there is that there's only a limited amount of money that can be had from philanthropic sources. And so this week's readings, we talk about other possibilities. One is government contracts and government money. And, that can be a fabulous source of income for a nonprofit. Um, in some cases, those contracts are consistent year after year. They're dependable. Um, the government agencies that you contract with are, good partners, um, and it's a really win-win situation. On the other hand, sometimes government agencies with which you contract and the entity of the government, whether that's state, local, or federal, have issues, and it's not always a win-win situation. Sometimes it's a double-edged sword. You do get the money, but then you have some problems that come along with the contract. And so I presented some readings this week from the Urban Institute, right? Elizabeth Boris did the studies, and it talks about some of the problems that human service nonprofits often have when they work with government entities. Okay, so it's not to say never contract with the government, because I worked for a $50 million organization and all of our money came from government contracts, and we did it, various social services across the board. Um, but just know that enter those contracts with your eyes wide open, and that's what those readings are about this week. The second set of readings actually have to do with social enterprises and earned income. Remember that actually most of the revenue in the nonprofit sector does come from earned revenues, and so you really need to think about how your organization can generate earned income either through the programs it runs, or sometimes you have capacities that you don't really think about too much that can be turned into money-making propositions or revenue-generating possibilities. And so we talk a little bit about that this week in terms of the New Stage Theater that we looked at a couple of weeks back, and just to think about the capacities they have and how they could turn those capacities into money-making activities that are in line with the mission but generate unrestricted income. All right. And then lastly, in your readings, there is a thing about social enterprises. Um, and I said earlier that I'm in the basement where I have my office for my social enterprise. It's a granola company. We're the Newman's owner of locally made granola. We give 100% of our profits away to charities chosen by you, the customer, which is why the company is called Your Choice Brands. Um, I didn't include um, anything about my company in the in the materials of the week. I thought that'd be pretty cheesy, but you can go online and learn a little bit about it. If anybody's really interested, send me an email or a note somewhere in the discussion forums, and I'll send you along some more information about the company, the business plan, the history, where we're going, blah, blah, blah. And I think the other thing I will post is a paper I wrote for Arnova. That's for like the Association of Professors and Researchers of Nonprofit Organizations. We meet once a year for a big conference. Will Brown, who's head of the program there at the Bush School, the nonprofit sector, has been very active in that organization. It's actually where I met Professor Brown at an Arnova conference. And anyway, I gave a paper once on sort of this relationship between nonprofits and earned income. And you may find it interesting. You may not. You don't have to read it. But anyway, it's there, okay? All right, and then just lastly, I also included in this week's materials the case study that is the final, or that the final is based on. You'll get the question, I guess, the final question, and the final assignment next week. But I wanted to give you the case study this week because students who do well on the case study have read it a number of times. It's 11 pages, and it has another 10 or 12 pages of financial data and exhibits. Okay, so don't try to read it once and do the final exam. Read it this week, think about it, read it a couple of times, think about it, read it again, and so that when the final comes and you're presented with the challenge of the final assignment, you'll be able to spend all your time thinking about the materials that you now have read and studied, as opposed to trying to absorb the material. Okay? Because to do the final well, you have to not just spit back the material, the content, you have to really analyze it and manipulate that data. Okay? So spend this week trying to absorb the material, spend next week analyzing it and applying the themes of the course. Okay? All right. Enough? I think so. I'll see you online, and have a good week, and always call if need be. Okay? All right. Thanks.